The gritty sound of brick rubbing against itself slid up Robert's spine like a canoe fighting against the river current. It's almost 4 o'clock in the morning, he thought to himself, scratching the outer portion of his bare thighs and willingly letting out of bed. Yawning, he looked out the window down to the side street, nothing. Turned his head from side to side, becoming more alert. Robert could not find the source of this unbearable sound that seemed to be permeating his entire apartment and internal being. He looked down, his eyes revealing a single pair of bricks sitting on the wooden floor next to his bed. One brick was stationary, and the other on top, circling around the bottom one as if on a hinge. In a moment, the bricks were still, and the sound stopped. He stood staring at the ground and pondered for a moment, but silence began to fill the room and Robert's eyelids grew heavy. He crawled back in bed, sliding underneath his woolen blankets, laying his head softly on the pillow. His mind was adrift when he began to hear a familiar grinding hum. Robert quickly sat up in bed. His small efficiency room was filling up with revolving bricks. The bricks in his own walls began to follow suit, first loosening and then slowly turning around on top of each other. The relentless grinding sound was massaging his temples as he watched the walls of his apartment move in waves. Robert slipped to the floor and lay with his ear pressed against the floor. He heard the unmistakable grinding of gears and the sound of hydraulic pumps releasing pressure. He was terrified beyond measure. He awoke up suddenly, like in a dream. He was on the floor with his ears pressed against the lacquered wood. Instead of grinding bricks and machinery, he only heard the sounds of Mrs. Thompson in the apartment below, making him breakfast and singing in a low voice. The terror began to fade. He walked to the bathroom and turned on the cold water. A stream of wood poured from the faucet. He closed the valve and dubiously watched as the flow slowed to a trickle of splinters and then stopped. This had to be part of the sickness, right? Upon opening the hot water valve, a trickle of the smallest sized Lego bricks began to fall out. The amazing thing was that it all went down the drain just fine. One would think that trying the kitchen faucet might have been a good idea, but after discovering that the shower head rained down on him leaves upon his head, and that the toilet filled up with cash register receipts after flushing it, there was probably no use. He was dying of thirst, and he had to act fast. After finding what was coming out of each source was cool and wet, he simply poured a bit from each into a glass and drank deeply. Each of them had their own unique flavor, and all of them were awful. He thought for a minute of whether or not his life was worth drinking, what could best be besides his cat urine. Only the thought of returning to his family kept him from not immediately transferring the liquid from his stomach to the floor. The shaman instructed him that the only cure for his poison was to find the right combination of liquids pouring out of the rock. His first guess was to combine the liquids from all 5 sources into one concoction. After his first week, his flaking skin only got worse. The boils bubbled faster from his skin, and he was losing more fluid from his body than he could possibly replenish from the rock. His subsequent combinations and mixed results, some did nothing, while some merely slowed the degradation of his skin. He was quickly running out of time. His skin and vital bodily fluids were sloughing off so fast his lips could barely contain his elixir. As his last-ditch effort, he realized the order in which fluids were added were just as important as what was ordered. The shaman gave him clues during his teleconference. Remember my area code is 241, so you can call me later. The shaman gave him clues during his teleconference. After receiving these clues, he got into his car and headed west with no particular purpose. Part of him just wanted to forget the past 15 minutes of his life. The reckless abandon with which he had thrown himself into this mess involved a risk that he was not usually accustomed to. He'd much prefer a quiet night at home watching reruns of bad 90s sitcoms until passing out on the couch, and otherwise mundane existence that was still in shock from what the past few days had led to, and now this. Did the shaman actually expect him to travel to Madagascar? And if he did, was it going to be worth it? He didn't exactly trust him, but he felt he had no other choice. After every other tactic, every other approach failed and time was running out, he didn't make the trip, he was concerned that all he could be doing was sitting at home, redecorating and retaining water. And he didn't blame the shaman for being passionate. In fact, he applauded him. His last vision before his departure was of the trunk, full of flints and tubes, rattles and satchels of obscure powders and herbs. Outside was the tilted sunset.
Monday in January, that was called The Grind.